What's the real battle unfolding in the world today, Gregg?
There's a battle for our beliefs. What do we believe about who we are, where we come from, the origin of human, the origin of our planet, the origin of the universe? And they're all important. The movement to replace our bodies with synthetic materials falls under the umbrella. We've all heard of this, the transhuman movement. Literally, if we are replacing our biology with the technology, we lose access to our divinity. When we give our humanness away to technology, our natural biological systems begin to atrophy, and once that happens, we never get them back.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered about where we come from, what's been hidden, and what's the real human story, then do we have the Wisdom Code show for you. Today I'll be talking with world-renowned scientist and best-selling author of books such as The Wisdom Codes, Gregg Braden, as we look at what's really going on with our hidden history, humanity, and the world. So welcome back to the show, Gregg. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine, Michael. I am so excited to be with you today. It's our first time together today. I'm coming to you from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this is completely unscripted. We have no idea where this is going to go. And it's a dance. My brother, I'm going to follow your lead, and I know we're going to have a great time.
We are, and I can't resist saying, in driving from Santa Fe to Taos to who knows where up north was one of the few times that I saw some maybe not extraterrestrial vehicles zipping up over the desert sky. But we'll get there in a little bit. Before we go there, what's the real battle unfolding in the world today, Gregg?
You know, there are battles within battles, and I think we all know that. There's a battle for our thoughts, playing out through mainstream legacy media. That's no secret. We all know that. There's a battle for our beliefs. What do we believe about who we are, where we come from, the origin of human, the origin of our planet, the origin of the universe? We all know that that's playing out in the classrooms and the textbooks. There's a battle for our bodies. We have just witnessed that over the last few years, and it's an ongoing battle. And they're all important, Michael, every one of them. For me, they are masking an even deeper battle that is not so obvious to some people, and that is literally a battle for our very humanness and aspects of our humanness that give us the extraordinary potentials that are given to no other form of life that we know of today in this world. I have no doubt that these potentials exist in other forms of life and in other realms. But what we as scientists, I'm a scientist, and what I can say to you as a scientist is that there's no other form of life on Earth that we know of right now that has been blessed with the extraordinary potentials that we have today. And it is those potentials, Michael, I'm going to be really clear on this, it's those potentials that lead to an even deeper battle for something that is called our divinity. And I want to be clear on what I mean by this, because many people associate divinity with religion, and I can see why that would happen. But if you look up the dictionary definition, divinity simply means the ability to transcend perceived human limitations. That's it. To transcend, to become more than perceived. It doesn't even mean they're real. They are limitations we placed upon ourselves. And there is a part of us, a biological aspect linked directly to the DNA that was fused and mutated 200,000 years ago that gives us the abilities that we have today, the movement to replace our bodies with synthetic materials, chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, wires under the skin, sensors on the body, falls under the umbrella. We've all heard of this, the transhuman movement. Literally, if we are replacing our biology with the technology, we lose access to our divinity. And there is a lot of controversy around this. Why would we want to do that? Who's driving it? But you asked the question, the ultimate battle, all the other things, Ukraine is important. The collapsing banking system is important. Climate is important, and there is a level at which they become diversions, Michael, because when we're focused there, what we're not looking at is what's happening to us. And I'll just say this, the reason it's so vital is because it's happening in a single generation. And when we give our humanness away to technology, what happens is our natural biological systems begin to atrophy. And once that happens, we never get them back. So we are literally in the process of giving away elements of our humanness before we even know what they are. We don't understand ourselves well enough to make that choice. And there's the arrogance of people in the scientific community that believe that they know better and are trying to re-engineer our biology. And I believe that is the greatest threat that we face as a species right now.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring us back around. I'm going to bring us full circle right back to here, because I want to go back to ancient technologies, or ancient civilizations, and where we really came from. And this idea of us being fused and mutated, and our chromosomes being fused and mutated, and all these changes taking place. I believe that we are the ultimate that we know of an ascendant being, meaning we are constantly changing, constantly growing, constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly growing. But actually it is cyclical. We may have actually been more evolved at one point, and then we disappeared. What's happening, Gregg?
The word evolution, evolution is the key word here. So I'm going to come at this. I have my personal perspective, and then I have my scientific knowledge, and I'll delineate when I walk either one of those. As a scientist, and I'm a degreed geologist by primary degree, with a very strong background, math, physics, computer science, archaeology, and cosmology. And I say that because it is that multidisciplinary background that allows me to stay current with new discoveries that are published in very obscure scientific journals. They're not secret. They're out there. It's just nobody reads these very technical, obscure scientific journals. This information is not trickling down into the mainstream. You won't find this in mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, certainly not in mainstream legacy media and pop scientists. So what I mean by a pop scientist, these are the so-called experts that the media will bring on to comment on what it means when the core of the Earth stops rotating, which happened in March, for example, or what it means when we find evidence of a civilization 20,000 years before present underneath ice in Antarctica, when we're led to believe that civilization's only 5,000 years old.
And we're going to have to go there.
Yeah, we will. So what I will say to you as a scientist is this. What the science shows, that the DNA evidence has now removed much of the speculation about who we are. It's opened the door to a whole lot more questions. But for the viewers that may not be aware of this, we now can do what used to be science fiction just a few years ago. When the first Jurassic Park movie came out, the really good one, the very first one, when it came out, that was based in what was science fiction at the time, and it is no longer 100% science fiction. We now have the ability to isolate and remove the DNA from fossilized remains of ancient forms of life, including those that we believed we descended from. And when we can remove that DNA, what we can do is build a genome. Now, it's not in a test tube, it's on a computer printout. We can look at the genome of those forms of life, and we can compare it to ours, and it tells us who we are and who we are not. We know that we are not the descendant of Neanderthal, for example, and that is very well accepted. We walk the earth with them. We shared the earth. They say we probably had Neanderthal boyfriends and girlfriends, and that's why you will see Neanderthal DNA show up in, 23andMe or some of the, the DNA tests that you can do. There are remnants of that, but we shared the earth with them. We didn't descend from them. What the DNA also shows, and this is where it gets really controversial, Michael, and from my perspective, really beautiful, is that we are now called anatomically modern humans. It's abbreviated AMH is the acronym. And scientists are in total agreement with the first part of what I'm going to say to you. Anatomically modern humans showed up on this planet about 200,000 years ago. Scientists are pretty much in agreement with that. The question is, how did we get here? Where do we come from? What the DNA is showing is that there are mutations in our genome now that we can look and compare our genome today to those of our ancestors, they have been there from the very beginning. So there are mutations in our genome that showed up 200,000 years ago that give us the extraordinary capabilities that no other form of life has. So, for example, I think that for me, one of the smoking guns is human chromosome number 2. It's the product of the fusion of 2 pre-existing chromosomes, but it didn't stop there. Because after the fusion occurred, there were genes that were added, there were genes that were silenced, there were genes that were deleted to stabilize that fusion. And it is that fusion that gave us a brain 50% larger than our nearest primate. It gave us it accounts for about 80% of the neocortex that we have today. And here's why that's important. Very, very simply, it is what gives us our uniquely human abilities of sympathy, empathy, compassion, the ability to self-regulate on demand when we choose to self-regulate our own biology, to create a strong immune system when we choose, to awaken longevity enzymes when we choose, and to keep those longevity enzymes going, to create resilience to change. I mean, who doesn't want that? The world's changing faster than we know how to document it. It gives us access to super cognition, super memory, super learning, and so much more, all from chromosome 2. And that's not the only one. If that was the only one, you could say maybe it's a fluke. Chromosome number 7 is a mystery. And there is a gene called FOXP2, which is very controversial. But I mentioned before we went on camera, when I'm not doing what I'm doing now, I was a musician long before I was ever an author or a scientist. And it's probably one of the most stable things in my life, and probably one of the saving graces in my life. And as a musician and a scientist, I've always wondered, we share 98% of our genome with a chimpanzee. I mean, that's almost all of it. That 2% is what sets us apart. 98% of our DNA we share with a chimpanzee. As a musician, I know I'm never going to hear a chimpanzee sing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And I don't think anybody else will either. And the question is why? And the answer, this is a mind blower, is there are a series of genes in chromosome number 7 that have been stable in all primates, all the forms of primate life for 175 million years. They didn't budge. All of a sudden, there was this little shift, this little twist in DNA. It was the rearrangement of 2 DNA letters in the genome. We're all familiar with CTAG, the letters that make up the genome, that connected our tongue and our jaw and a part of our brain that links those things together, that gives us the ability for complex speech and the ability to sing. And you say, well, okay, well, that's interesting. You know, maybe that's just a fluke. Well, both of these things happened. They didn't happen slowly, gradually over a long period of time, as Darwin's theory of evolution would lead us to believe. They happened very quickly. They happened exactly 200,000 years ago when we showed up on the planet. Here's the kicker. We haven't changed. The genome is the same today as it was when we showed up. It violates a fundamental law of evolution that says nature never overendows. It says that we never have more than we need until we need it. And what this says, Michael, is that and I'm happy to be the first maybe to share this with your audience. Audience, we are overendowed. We're all overendowed as humans because we showed up with capabilities light years beyond what was needed just to survive 200,000 years ago. And we're only beginning to access many of those capabilities today. So that's a long answer to a short question. I wanted to lay this out. Who or what is responsible for this? As a scientist, what I have to say is that we're the product of some kind of an intelligent intervention. And I think that's a fair word, intervention. Now, there are all kinds of theories and stories and interpretations. The truth is that no one knows for certain. We see archaeological representations of what may have happened. We have cultural representations, oral traditions from the indigenous people that I go to. Those aren't facts. So they support a story. Certainly, they support a narrative that we are part of something much greater than we've been led to believe conventionally. I mean, you and I, our audience, I think we all know that. You have a very sophisticated audience, Michael, and that's why I'm really excited to be with you, because I know we can get to the core of this conversation. So I have to say, as a scientist, that it appears we're the product of some kind of intervention. Up until 2012, that intervention was a mystery. In the year 2012, a new technology was announced to the world that I know everybody's heard of now. It's called CRISPR gene editing. And it was the first time that we realized a technology that would allow us efficiently to do in a genome what we see evidence of that happened in ours. And the question is, who had CRISPR technology 200,000 years ago? And look where we are today. What the amazing things we can do today, it's only been since 2012. What would it mean to a civilization that has had this for hundreds of thousands of years? And that opens the door to the rest of the conversation, I think.
Thank you. And you covered a wide breadth, and I'm going to blow it out of the water even more. We're going to go weird here. We're going to go Atlantis. We're going to go Antarctica. We're going to go pyramids around the world. We're going to go maybe pyramids on Mars, and we're going to go to the question as, would you support that the new story is we did not start here?
Oh, yeah. I think so. There is a new human story that's emerging. So there's a bigger picture happening here, because none of this conversation is happening in a vacuum. We're living in a world that is changing faster than we can document it. There are multiple visions of what the world and our lives should look like based upon multiple agendas of what the world and our lives should look like. And it's within the context of that information is and narratives are being structured to lead us to believe very specific narratives so that we will follow paths of other people's ideas of life and the world. I mean, we've got, obviously the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. We've got the United Nations now complicit in that through an agreement that was signed in 2019. We've got the push towards centralization in the world and centralized power and centralized control at a time when it makes more sense to localize, not centralize, to live locally, to grow our food locally, not have it shipped in a supply chain from halfway around the world, localized economies, localized finances. But those all, Michael, those all imply a sense of sovereignty and personal power that is lost in a story that says we're the product of random mutations. We are an accident of biology. Lucky biology is what it's called. And if we're just the product of random mutations, it leads us to feel powerless and victims in a world that's changing quickly. And if we're powerless victims, we need a savior. And that savior is being touted as technology. And that is where the technology in the world around us and the technology within our bodies is coming in. The movement to replace so much of our biology with artificial gadgets. When we do that, we lose the very essence of what sets us apart from other forms of life. We lose our divinity. We lose our sovereignty. We lose our ability to self-regulate our own biology. I just want to say this really quickly, because I was in an audience, a live audience 2 weeks ago, which I love being with my live audiences. We were with them for 4 days in northern Arizona. And we had some young people. And this is the beauty. We've got a new generation of young people that are just waking up to this conversation that, you and I have been having for years, and others have been having, since the early 20th century. And it's very cool that they're waking up to this. And they've been led to believe that computers and computer chips are the God, that is the savior of all. And when I said to them, what I'm going to say to you and your audience is my family. So I'm going to say what I'm about to say to your audience and my family, my community, is this. I'm a scientist and I'm a tech guy. And I worked in high tech during the Cold War years on a project called SDI, Star Wars Defense. So I say that because Star Wars Defense Initiative, SDI, because I've seen the most advanced laser systems, radar systems, communication systems, and I respect them tremendously. And they are powerful. But here's the deal. A computer chip in the brain, a computer chip will never be able to process faster than the physics of the stuff it's made from allows it to process. The information between the atoms in the silicon, for example, if we're using silicon, that there's a limit to that. There's a high end to that. It's not scalable beyond that limit. So when we talk about computer chips in the brain, are they fast? Absolutely. Are they efficient? Totally. But look at this. The human neuron and the cells in the human body, we do not know the top end of the performance for our own biology. And here's the reason, because every time we reach what we call a limit or a wall or a plateau, we adapt and our cells shift to accommodate that new environment. And all of a sudden we are outperforming what it was that we thought was the high end before. This is true of brains. We used to think that 40 hertz was the high end of the brain state. And now Tibetan monks have shown us we had to bump it to 80 hertz and then 100 hertz and new brain states called the gamma brain state and the hyper gamma brain state and the epsilon brain. Now we're over 200 cycles per second. When I was in school back in 1950s and 1960s, we were taught 40 hertz was the top end. The human brain couldn't possibly do any more than that. Now we're being taught that 200 hertz is the top end. We don't know how scalable we are. We are this highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, soft technology. We were given the gift of this form and this technology 200,000 years ago by who or whatever is responsible for those mutations and there are more. I just gave you two examples for those mutations or those fusions. And that mystery has driven civilization to try to find a way to accommodate the depth of that mystery by building religions and by building spiritual traditions and principles and stories to explain this deep mystery, Michael, of who we are. And I'm privileged now to know that you've just brought a new life with your partner into this world. And it is one of the deepest mysteries in terms of how, it's so common, we see it, but how does that really happen? And what actually happened in the moment that the cells in your wife's womb became animated and a new life emerged? We still don't have the answer to that, yet we're willing to give that away and compromise it. The uncertainty of what that life holds for the certainty of artificial intelligence, computer chips, wires, chemicals in the body. And this is happening in this lifetime, and it's part of this big context that we're talking about. We're not exploring our past within a vacuum. Our past informs us and says that we are extraordinary beings. And I know we're going to talk about what that past is. But if we take that memory away, then we are vulnerable to the ideas of other people, and we're vulnerable to the social engineering that we're seeing that threatens our way of life and our very existence today. So I think it's important. There's a context here. We have to keep that context in mind.
Thank you. And I think based on what you were saying, there's about to be a very beautiful cameo appearance here in a moment.
Okay. I hope I didn't overstep any bounds.
Oh, God,
I have no children of my own, and I'm in awe of the mystery, and I'm thrilled when I get to see them.
Oh no, she is the miracle of miracle. The thing is, when you talk about evolution in this other context, and this is Hannah Bear. This is the love of our lives.
Hey, Hannah Bear. So how did Hannah Bear just appeared on the screen? Did she just walk to you, or was she handed off?
Both. She was dropped off by the table, and she came over because she knows exactly what I'm doing. She's 14 months of age. She knows exactly what I'm doing, and she would be very displeased if she did not get to say hi, if she did not get to meet you, if she did not get to reach out to everybody who's watching her. and she had just woken up from her nap, but she wouldn't have it. I know. She's looking at the mouse, which is very exciting to her. She wouldn't have it anywhere. They come in, Gregg, wired differently.
I know they do. I I have none of my own. I get to be around others that do, and I'm still in awe. And we were talking about this off camera. There are many people locked in an old idea that there are too many people on the earth, and what the new data is showing is just the opposite is happening right now, that our fertility rates globally have dropped like a rock. They already have, and that it's becoming more difficult to conceive. It takes more times to conceive, and there are
she is a miracle baby. Three miscarriages and lost her twin sister in utero.
I was just going to say the number of miscarriages to arrive at a successful conception is increasing. So she is a miracle, and I am loving that she's here with us today. Hey, beautiful.
Hello.
Hey, beautiful.
Do you want to say hi? Hello.
Congratulations to you and your wife. I don't know how you find time to do what you're doing now. I would spend all my time with her.
Are you really trying to flip upside down right now? Is that what you're trying to do? No? Okay. We don't have to. She's the greatest teacher. And so when we look at this, okay, here you go. When we look at this.
So you got to ask her all the questions you're asking me. She's going to have good answers.
She's going to have good answers. And more than that, I think she's able to point out the bullshit. Even at 14 months of age, I think she's able to see through things. And so if we look, and I want to bring it back to the pyramids, I want to bring it to Atlantis and Antarctica, and I know it precedes that and precedes that and precedes that and precedes that because we have such collective amnesia, whether that's deliberate or otherwise. But I'm sure she could see this story, just like she's looking at a little hardcover book. I'll go, that's a story. That's made up. What you're telling me is made up. That's not the truth. So what do we know about past civilizations, and what are you convinced is not made up?
Well, that's, we could do the whole program based on, I'm actually speaking at a conference in 2 weeks, Ancient Civilizations Conference in Gaia. As a geologist, I'm speaking. So what we know is when I was in school, again, back in the 1950s and 60s, early 70s, and interestingly, they're teaching the same thing today. Michael, exactly the same thing. We're taught that civilization's about 5,000 years old, that it began in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley around 5,500 years ago, Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and things like that. And that is that's the story that's pretty much dialed in. And that's what everyone is mainstream. They're teaching our kids this stuff today. The problem is, there have always been archaeological discoveries that didn't fit into that 5,000 years. And so those are called anomalies. And so what happens is that the scientists, historians will say, okay, these are anomalies. We'll come back and we'll figure these out later. Well, what has happened now is there's so many anomalies. The anomalies are telling a new story unto themselves. And what they're showing is that 5,000 years from Sumeria forward, that's the history, Rome and Greece and, India and, so much of the things that the Mayan, the Aztec, Incan, all of that stuff fits into that 5,500 years. What we now know is that 5,000 years is only the most recent 5,000 year cycle. And there was a 5,000 year cycle before that, and another one before that, and another one, at least 5 of these 5,000 year cycles.
Going back a procession.
So it's linked to cosmological processes, but it's also linked to geological processes. So, for example, as a geologist, I know that what history now is showing is that something happened on Earth between 12 and 13,000 years ago, the BP, before present. There was a catastrophe on Earth, and it's called the Younger Dryas. And that the climate changed abruptly. We went from a warming into a deep freeze that happened so quickly. People seen this. So woolly mammoths were frozen in the middle of a mouthful of food. The food is still in their mouths. They were frozen in the middle of a step. This isn't a gradual change. This happened very, very quickly. Well, what's interesting is that if we look back another 13,000 years, we see something similar happening again. These are 12 and 13,000 year cycles that appear to be driven by processes underneath our feet. It's the relationship between the core of our planet, the mantle of our planet, volcanic activity, how it influences climate and weather, magnetic fields, all of that. The point is, it is cyclic, and the cycles appear to be driven by something beyond our Earth in the cosmos. So we are living rhythms that are not commonly acknowledged because our society doesn't think in terms of cycles like that. So when you talk about civilization, the most recent cycle of 5,000 years is the one that we're most familiar with. Unfortunately, Michael, what happens is through the catastrophic events, when the climate changes, when the ice melts and the sea levels rise and the volcanic ash falls and the floods happen, evidence of previous civilizations is hidden. And unless we know where to look, we only find them occasionally and by accident, and that's what has happened in the past. So we've got Göbekli Tepe,
yes,
in Turkey. Yeah, that now goes back over into the last ice age. So it falls into this, not 5,000, but now 10,000 years and before that. We've got the Gulf of Khambhat in India, 3 miles long, 5 miles wide. It's under the water, 120 feet underwater. It's an entire city in the place where the Hindu traditions and the Vedas say the gods had their city, and everybody thought it was make-believe, and now it was discovered by accident, but it's there. It doesn't fit the model. Now we're looking, climate change is melting the ice on the North and South poles, including Antarctica, and now the satellites are showing complex structures under the Antarctic ice. These aren't like hunting huts. These are vast, complex structures. They're under the ice. The ice peaked 20,000 years ago. So the question is, who was building vast, complex structures before the ice was there 20,000 years ago? And now you're looking back into even deeper cycles. So this is the problem that scientists have, is that the evidence doesn't fit the story that they're telling. And I have friends in academia, and I asked them, I said, why won't you share this stuff with your students? And they don't want to. They just say, Greg, you don't understand. They say if we share the new information, it invalidates a 40-year career as a historian. And I said, no, just the opposite. What it does is it shows that science is valid because science is not static. It's not a static way of knowing. It's dynamic. It needs to be constantly updated as we discover new things to update. And then there are the political issues, and there's the power and the control issues. There are religious issues. For example, I'll just give you a perfect example. My first trip to Egypt was 1986. And it was at that time that seismic work was being done underneath the Sphinx, identifying the chambers that are in a vast complex underneath the Giza Plateau. And it was all being kept under wraps. And I asked my dear Egyptian brother, who no longer is in this world, I asked him, I said, why can't you share this with the world? And he said, Greg, you don't understand. He said, we're a Muslim country. And I said, well, I know that. He said, well, in our tradition, Earth is only 6,000 years old. What would it mean if the evidence to show that we're looking at civilizations 15 and 20,000 years old appears in a Muslim country? What would that mean for us? He said, we will at some point have to reveal it. But he said, we have so many problems now, we don't need to add to the problems with this one. And so we don't talk about it. And unfortunately, that's one example. Something similar is happening in the Christian traditions. We have disclosure going on right now about our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. The Jesuits, who are the scientific arm of the Catholic Church, had to come out. They had a conference and they came out with a statement. Now, I didn't know we were going to do this, so I'm going to do this from memory, but it's pretty close. What they said was, from the Catholic perspective, it is not in opposition of Catholic doctrine for life to exist beyond the earth. So they're kind of covering themselves. They're not saying it does, but if it does, the church is okay with it. And because they say God could have placed his creations in many different places. So, there's just different perspectives of why we don't want this information to come to light. The problem is it is coming to light. And that we don't know how old civilization is because we have evidence that keeps pushing it back further and further and further. And if you look at a map, superimposed on the map, they fit into these cycles that are driven by geologic processes.
So let's go there. Thank you so much, Greg. Let's go there for a minute. And you were talking about the Earth's core coming to a halt a few months back. What are the processes going on? And the question that everybody is asking right now, we're going to take it from a different angle from science right now. Is this civilization, if there's been civilization collapsing, and we don't know where that even started, we can say, okay, 200K, we appeared here from somewhere, so it probably wasn't before that. But are we doomed?
I believe we're not. And I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying I'm an optimist. And I'm also a realist. Michael. And I believe that in this iteration of our humanness, we have things that those before us did not have. We now have a technology, and we have a knowledge that gives us an evolutionary edge that our ancestors may not have had. And I'm not saying that those civilizations weren't advanced. I think they were tremendously advanced in different ways. Technology means different things to different civilizations. And I believe that we have the knowledge and we have the technology. The two questions that remain is, from that knowledge, will we develop the wisdom to apply what we know in a meaningful way? And the second question is, do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth of the beautiful history that is ours? Do we love ourselves enough to be honest with ourselves about who we are and where we've come from, so that we don't make the mistakes and that we don't succumb to the cataclysms that have taken entire civilizations in the past? And I'm just going to say, we won't have to wait long to find the answer.
Oh, that's so true. And that's my whole job, my raison d'etre right now, my reason for being is to set ourselves free from all of these, we can call it the matrix, we can label it whatever we want, but to remember who and what we truly are. Because when we understand that, then we link arms hand in hand as brothers and sisters and step forward, rather than saying leaders to somebody up there or in Washington or who knows where, please save us, because that ain't going to happen.
Well, what's happening right now, and again, this is why I prefaced what I said earlier, this conversation isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a context, and the context is that we are living a time unlike any time in our 5,000 years of recorded human history. We're living the convergence of a number of cycles. Some of them we know about and some we don't. Obviously, we're living a climate cycle right now. That is enough to turn everything upside down if it were happening alone, but it's not. We're also living a cycle of human conflict. Human conflict appears to be driven largely, and you can map this out. The magnetic fields of our planet, when they are low, we are more aggressive, and that's when we have the big wars. When they are high, we are more willing to cooperate, and we are is when peace happens. And we are living right now. The year 2020 was the peak of a weak cycle, actually the trough of a weak cycle. However, 2020 we were in lockdown. And so I think it was delayed. We're now living what could have happened 2 years ago. Obviously, there's a lot of conflict in the world right now, but the beauty of knowing that is that we're also living the greatest opportunity for peace. And when we look at the way conflict is plotted on against the cycles of magnetics for our planet that are driven by solar processes and cosmic processes as well, we see that the beginnings and the ends of the great wars have always come at the top, at the peaks and the bottoms of these cycles.
So does that mean, just to interrupt for a brief second, there were supposed to be peaks in solar cycles or solar flares around 2025 that we're now told may be coming toward the end of 2023? Is that related to this?
Well, it's all related. We're moving into, we are coming out of a solar minimum and a very quiet solar cycle. And the sun is becoming more active sooner than it was predicted to have become. What they thought was going to happen in like 2027, they're saying now, the number of sunspots and the number of flares that we have right now are preceding where the predictions were. And they said that it's not going to last until that long. We're 24, 25, I think we're going to see a lot of activity around that. So that's another cycle. We're also living the convergence of an economic cycle. We are at the 13,000 year mark from the last 13,000 year cataclysm that typically is driven by geophysical processes under our feet, and we can talk about those specifically. But what they do is they create an uptick in volcanic activity and supervolcanoes, and that is what changes the climate on the planet for years and years and years. That's what's led to the decline and the loss of many civilizations in the past. When the climate changes, for example, the volcanic activity spews sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. It effectively blocks sunlight for years. When Mount Pinatubo erupted, the estimates are about 170 million metric tons of sulfur dioxide were thrown up into the atmosphere, and the Earth's temperature dropped 1 degree Celsius for about a year just from that. So these are the things that when that happens, that means there's more ice that forms. The ice takes over forests that we use to produce the oxygen that we need to absorb the carbon dioxide. So let me just say it this way. We live in a holistic system that is rarely acknowledged in mainstream science. We talk about the atmosphere as if it were an isolated system. We have the atmosphere, certainly, and we have what's called the cryosphere, and that's the ice on the planet. We have the hydrosphere, those are the oceans on the planet. We have the lithosphere, and that is the rock under our feet. And these are all interrelated, and we cannot have something happen in one that doesn't affect all of the others. That's a problem because we've got the arrogance of scientists who are geoengineering this planet without understanding. We have the arrogance of knowing just enough technology to have an effect, but not understanding the deep truth of the interrelated nature of those systems, just the way the arrogance of the scientist wants to engineer the human body without fully understanding the interconnected nature of the human body and the field around us and the role of DNA. It all comes down to, we know just enough to mess things up. And in my opinion, there are some things we shouldn't be messing with. And those are two of them, the human body and the atmosphere of our planet. Yeah, the atmosphere of the planet, when they talk about geoengineering, that one is, but bring it, all of what you say is that way. But that one gets me, like the recent discussions in the quote unquote discussions in the White House, and you're going, oh my gosh. Going full circle, though, you said something fascinating. No, you said everything fascinating, Gregg. But I'm happy to know something was fascinating. Your daughter looks interested, so I've got an audience. Yeah, and she just keeps on saying, "Just feed me. I'm listening. I'm taking this all in." There's an intelligence here that gets to be addressed. And I'm not talking about God. We could call it the field, but it was interesting that you said these wars take place at a magnetic minimum, but we're coming out of that, so it was suppressed, and now it's coming out now. But that solar activity that wasn't going to be around until maybe 2027 seems to be coming earlier. And to me, what I hear is
There's an intelligence behind this. The universe is alive, and she's bringing things about at a specific time for a specific reason. And so if things go off balance here, there's a natural tendency to try to bring them back to balance.
You could think of it that way. And it's layers upon layers, Michael, and it depends on how deep people really want to go. As a scientist, I'm a systems thinker. So I tend to go after, and I always have all my life, I tend to go after the big picture first to understand the mechanism, and then I let that go and zero in on the nanosecond of my life to figure out where I fit into that big picture. So the big picture is that we live in a dynamic system. We've been taught that it's a static system. We've been taught that the climate should always be what it was 20 years ago, and if it's not, that something is broken. And that simply is not true. And as a geologist, I can go back into the geologic record. We appeared 200,000 years ago. I can go back 400,000 years ago, and I can show you the same cycles and where we are in those cycles. And there were no humans that were causing it, no industry during that time. Do we know? I want to be really clear. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to go clean. We need to go green, and we're not causing the climate to change. If we had no fossil fuels, the climate would still be, we're adding to it. We're definitely, we have to say we're adding to it because we're kicking stuff into the air, but we're not what's making it. And this is a problem because when we eliminate all the fossil fuels and the climate change continues, a narrative is in trouble. And what do you do with that narrative? And I think that's one of the problems with disclosure right now. Disclosure is going to reveal sources of energy that make fossil fuels obsolete. When we stop burning them and the climate does not change, what do you do with that narrative? And that's a whole conversation unto itself.
Well, it brings up the pyramids and maybe what the pyramids were originally intended for, because they don't look like they do today. And my assumption is they had everything to do with energy.
They do, and probably not the way that we expect today. And I'll say something that I don't want to upset your audience, and I also want to be honest, truthful, and factual. Because I have recently been at conferences where people were clamoring for Tesla energy. Why, if only we had Tesla energy? I believe there's a beautiful balance and a symmetry in the universe, and that there is an intelligence that guides and directs us, whether we're aware of it or not. Michael, we actually dodged a bullet by not having Tesla successfully implement his technology early in the 1900s. And I'll tell you exactly why. Tesla's technology was based on what's called broadcast energy. And many of the pyramids were assumed to be that as well. Broadcast energy is where you transmit tremendous amounts of energy into the atmosphere for other people to pick up with an antenna and download into their home. Well, if you think that cell phone microwaves are bad, and microwave energy and 5G is bad, I'll just give you an example. If we had Tesla technology today, we could not have high-rise buildings made of steel girder construction, because the steel girders would be the antenna that would resonate with that energy. We couldn't have expansion bridges like the Golden Gate Bridge. We couldn't do that. Tesla proved a very powerful point. I have his lab notes from 1899 in Colorado Springs. I used to belong to the Tesla Society when I was working in the defense industry. I was also in the Tesla Society.
And how long were you in Colorado Springs? I lived in Springs till 2000.
Well, I didn't live there. I was working in Denver during the Cold War years on the Star Wars Defense SDI. It was a crazy program. But I would go down to the Springs because that's where the Tesla Society would meet every year. And we had, working replicas of his devices and his lab notes. The big experiments that he did where you see the sparks flying off of the coils, those were done in 1899 and 1900, right there in Colorado Springs. And what he did in those, he's an amazing man. I mean, I have deep reverence and tremendous respect for him, is that he proved that Earth is a resonant body. And he found Earth, when those sparks happen, is when resonance was achieved. And so he proved that. And all the electricity we have today is from his technology, the transformers that he built using his coils to hold us over until another form of energy was developed. That he never intended his technology to be in place and last for over 100 years, and that's where we are right now. However, if we had what's called broadcast energy, we couldn't wear some of the jewelry that we have. We couldn't have a society based in the way, and by the biological consequences of having that kind of an electrical charge in the atmosphere constantly. A lot of studies have been done around it. So I'll just say that I don't think it's an accident that we didn't implement that form of wireless energy. What will happen from disclosure is not that kind of energy. It's the kind of energy that literally taps the little vibrations in the Planck field. The field that surrounds us is made of little tiny, micro, beyond, it's below the Planck scale. So little elements of vibration tapping into those and then amping them into a useful range where everyone will have a little device. You'll have one in your home somewhere, and that energy will be what's driving everything in your home. You have a little one in your car, in place of an internal combustion engine. That's what will come from the disclosure. And a lot of people think it will destroy entire industries. We will still need oil because there are over 6,000 applications in our everyday lives that cannot be. Oil out of the ground is one of the most beautiful elements. It's a compound that cannot be replicated in the laboratory. We cannot make true synthetic oil. You can fake it to some degree. And we use over 6,000 applications in our daily lives. It's so precious. We need to stop burning it. That's the whole point. We need to stop burning it. And we will. And it will change industry, and there will be new industries that emerge around these new technologies. But I want to come back to the whole context for this conversation, Michael. None of it is in a vacuum. There is a movement going on. There's a battle for our humanness. Ultimately, I think it boils down to a battle of good and evil, light and dark, if you want to reduce it down to that level. Not religious, not even spiritual necessarily. There are forces out there. And we are the prize. We are the prize. And all the stuff that we're talking about, they're all facets, but ultimately it's all about us, our divinity, and whether or not we give our humanness away to the machines, which means we no longer have our divinity. What is divinity? Divinity, my wife's a musician as well, and she was at the Grammys earlier this year in Los Angeles. And every musician that you speak to, whether it's at the Grammys or anywhere else, they'll all tell you the same story. When they create something that is so powerful and beautiful, and you ask them, where did that music come from? Or where did that song come from? To a T, every one of them will say, it's not from me. They'll say it came through me. I had to be healthy enough, and I had to keep my life together enough, and my relationships and my body together enough to be able to access this beautiful thing that came through me. That's our divinity. It is our imagination, our creativity. It is the ability to sense beauty and to have compassion for other forms of life. And this is something that AI cannot have. And I don't think it will be able. AI is smart. It is efficient. It is logical. Absolutely. It doesn't have these human qualities. And I don't think it will be able to for this reason. AI is only possible because humans have built the algorithms that run the AI. Humans have yet to come to terms with their own humanness. Humans have yet to truly understand who we are and our relationship to the world around us. There is a thinking in the transhuman movement, Michael, that consciousness can be reduced to ones and zeros and stored on a computer chip, and that when you die, you can take that chip and download it into another form of life, and you come back to life as you. What they're missing is that the consciousness is not in the brain. It's not in the neurons. The consciousness is in the field. And the neurons are the antenna that access that consciousness like the antenna of a TV set used to access that station broadcast in the field. And until we come to terms with those kinds of relationships, Brian Greene, I have tremendous respect for Brian Greene, the physicist. I just saw an interview with him, and he believes, and he stated that he believes that consciousness, we will ultimately discover that consciousness is simply a phenomenon that happens when electrons move in a certain way. And that's what consciousness is. So this is where we are. I think the technology is pushing us. The only way it will be successful is if we understand who we are. And once we understand who we are, we'll no longer need that technology. That's the irony. And there is a battle playing out because there are forces that would prefer that we never come to terms with our true heritage and with our true potential. Because when we have that, when we know who we are and what our potential is, we are sovereign, free, beautiful, creative, imaginative beings that cannot be controlled. And everything right now is pushing toward centralization, digitalization, and the loss of freedom and more control. That's where we are right now.
Thank you. What can we learn then? You've spent a lot of time with the pyramids. You've spent a lot of time with indigenous peoples around the globe. Spent a lot of time in Peru. What can we learn both from ancient civilizations and, which is a strange term, modern indigenous people, which at the end of the day, we're all indigenous people. We're just lost, a little lost right now. But what can we learn about going even maybe beyond the science, who and what we really are? What does it mean to be human?
Well, I think that's the question. You know, when we talk about those civilizations, and I mentioned this offline, I have been blessed for over almost 46 years to travel into those remote and beautiful and isolated places when travel was easier and when we had more freedom. And when I became an adult, I was able to do that. I couldn't do it as a child. Many of those places are no longer accessible, Michael. We can no longer go on to the Tibetan plateau and the monasteries and the nunneries over 18,000 feet above sea level with the freedom that we were. Some of them no longer exist. They've been destroyed. So I've been blessed to have the opportunity to know myself in the presence, not only of the archaeology, but of the people who live in these places and preserve that wisdom. And they're all different from one another, but there are common themes that bring them all together. One of those themes, 100%, no exception, is that we are part of a greater cosmic community. That not one of those indigenous traditions say that we are the product of a slow, gradual, evolutionary process of random mutations. Not one of them. Now, is that science? No, it's culture. But it's culture that is so pervasive and across the board, whether they've spoken with one another or not. The Quero in Peru and the Quechuan people have the same stories that the Tibetans have, in the Himalayas. And have they ever spoken with one another? I don't know, not in recent times. So I think this is one thing we can learn, is that we are part of something greater. Number two is that, and because of that, we are no accident. We are not an accident of lucky biology. There is an intentionality underlying our existence. And there are all kinds of stories about why and who and what. That's not the science. And the science is telling us that the genetic mutations underlying our existence cannot happen under natural conditions. That is stated in the scientific literature. And then the scientists have to stop, because to go beyond that is a roadblock for them, because science doesn't allow for what that means. Science is reluctant to follow the evidence to the story that it tells. Science is trying to fit the evidence into a pre-existing story, even though it's not a good fit. So that's one thing. The other thing is the power of the human heart. When I was in school, I was taught the brain is a master organ in the body. And we all know the brain is important. It must be because we only have one. You know, a lot of things in our bodies, we have redundant systems, and the brain is not one of those. So the brain's important. However, what we now know is that the brain receives the instructions that tell it what to do from the heart. And the heart creates those instructions in a neural network that is informed through our interpretation, our perception of the world. So when we feel a sense of well-being, we feel that through the neural network in the heart, and the heart sends a signal to the brain and says, okay, everything's cool. You know, we don't have to run. We don't have to, there's a song in there, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Everything's good. So if we're not running and we're not hiding, that means we're not producing stress hormones and lots of cortisol and adrenaline, which means we are producing regeneration, rejuvenation, longevity, healing, immune response, because it's safe to do so. If we feel that we are threatened, and this is a problem, because we are fed 24/7 news feeds that give us problems in our lives and no way to resolve the problem. So we live, not you and me and maybe this audience, but a lot of the general population does, constantly threatened with no resolution. And what that does, it makes it sick. What that does is it puts us in fight or flight, high levels of cortisol, high levels of adrenaline, obesity, diabetic conditions, cardiovascular conditions. It shuts down longevity enzymes. It shuts down the immune response, and it keeps us in that constant state. And this is why the heart is so important. So the indigenous people, that's why they tell us that the healing begins in the heart, because it begins with how we feel about our relationship with the world. And the science bears that out 1,000,000%. So since the early 90s, I've worked with the Institute of Heart Math based in, they set up in Northern California, I think 91 is when I met them. I'm not their employee, but we work together, we travel together, we do webinars, fundraising, we become dear friends, and they are really, really good people. They're doing amazing work. And they have
I've had Howard on many, many times.
Oh, okay. Well, good. My brother Howard. Yeah. They have pushed they are a pioneering research organization exploring the power of the human heart in unconventional ways. So we all know the heart pumps blood, but you can build a machine to do that. There's so many things the heart does that you can't build a machine to do. And we're talking about those. It's the way the heart informs the brain, the pressure wave of the blood from the way the heart beats. The quality of that pressure wave moving through our arteries and veins and capillaries is a language, and it will inform the body of what it needs to be doing. Heart rate variability and the electromagnetic field, all of these are being created through the way we feel about our relationship to the world. When we are kept in fear, then it shuts down those responses that give us our power. And that's our divinity. And when we embrace our divinity, it doesn't change what happens in the world, Michael. It changes our response to it. When we are no longer in fear, we are no longer vulnerable and susceptible to the agendas and the vision that other people have for our own lives and the world around us. But that's not what's happening. And the technology now is what makes this possible. The technology is being used to engineer our perceptions, to engineer the way we think about ourselves through social media. And that is something that we all have to recognize and face right now.
So how do we, let's use this terminology, how do we bring ourselves into something of a global coherence so that there is a shift that takes place above and beyond the technology story that is really trying to drive us towards the edge, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael, and I appreciate your questions are very concise, and I appreciate that. My personal feeling is we can only be responsible for ourselves. And it is impossible to convince or persuade anyone of anything that they do not want to look at. And many of our brothers and sisters on this planet are so frightened by the changes that create so much uncertainty in their lives that it's more comforting to stay in the fear of the unknown than it is to face the potential and the responsibility that comes with knowing who they really are. So you cannot convince or persuade anyone of that. Now, having said that, ultimately, I think we're all responsible for our own lives, our own perceptions, our own healing, and it means different things to different people. But the science tells us that it doesn't take 8 billion people that live on the planet to create the kind of a shift that you're talking about, because we are all linked in an underlying field that scientific community, it's no longer controversial. It used to be called New Age thinking until 2012, when the scientists at the CERN superconducting super collider announced in 2012 that the existence of a field that underlies all the reality that we know. It's the container for everything that we know. And what that means, Michael, if we are all in the same container, what that says to us is that we don't have to work on changing the container out there. And the reason is because we are the container. And here's what I mean by that. And even after 2012, the scientists, so they make this big announcement. There's a field, it's called the Higgs field, is the term that's being used right now. It's been called the Matrix. The Divine Matrix is a book that I wrote. Lynn McTaggart calls it the field. All kinds of names for it, but it's there. But even today, I've gone to conferences, and here are the physicists on the stage, and here's what they're doing. They're saying there's a field, and then their hands do this. There's a field out there that connects all things. Here's what they're missing. The average human body has about 50 trillion cells, is what we're told. And every cell is about 100 trillion atoms. So if you want to know how many atoms you are, you can multiply 50 trillion times 100 trillion. Every one of those atoms is emerging from the field that they're talking about and collapsing back into that field in this dance of photons emerging and collapsing in the field. The field's not out there. Literally, we are the field. And what that means, this is so simple and it's so powerful. It means the change that we want to see in the world is the change that we must become in our lives, the change that we want to see in the world. And I know that sounds for some people to say, okay, yeah, but what do we really do? The answer to that is all the things you do to create that change in your life, whatever that means for you. But what the science now is also showing is a relatively few number of people can achieve an optimum state and influence that field for everyone in a positive way, because you don't have to export the change to another location. What we become is what that field reflects back into our lives. If we want to be loved, and if we want people to be compassionate to us in our lives, and if we want to be heard and understood, we must hear and understand those around us. We must accept and love ourselves, which is that's a lifetime of workshop right there, is loving ourselves, because we've been taught not to for so very, very long, for so many generations. But it makes perfect sense, Michael, that as we become in our lives what we choose to see in the world, all of a sudden, there's this real interesting thing that happens, is we feel less of a need to go out and change the world. We become a little bit more accepting. Doesn't mean that we tolerate the horrors of child trafficking or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, when we accept our role and our responsibility in the field that connects all things, then our focus shifts, because we got our hands full with our own personal workshop. My Gregg workshop of becoming in my life what I want to see for my brothers and sisters and for your daughter in her lifetime, what I want to see there, I have to become that. My hands are full with that right now. I'm a student. I know it, but I still have to learn it, and I still have to live it. And believe me, I get plenty of opportunities in this line of business every day with interactions with producers and attorneys and publishers and people who are angry. I get a lot of opportunity to live in my life what it is that I want to see in the world.
Well, it's interesting because anger is disempowering. You're giving your power away. You must be a victim, and somebody else must be an oppressor for you to be anger, and that does nothing to serve you.
I've looked a lot at when the riots were happening wholesale in America just a couple of years ago. And then I was in Europe. I was in Europe earlier this year, and American media is not picking this stuff up. And so I went into Europe not knowing that every European city I would go into, there were protests, there were riots, they would shut down public transportation. People could not get to our events because they had no way to travel across the city. Not everybody's got their own cars. They were relying on cabs and buses and trains, and they shut all that down. I went to London and shut down, I think we had 1,500 people in the conference, 400 people, they couldn't show up for their tickets because of that. And then I thought, well, that's London. Then I went to Paris with Bruce Lipton. We were teaching in Paris. Same thing was happening. I took a weekend and went to Prague over the weekend. And when I was in Prague, Czech Republic, they shut the country down for these protests and these riots. So it's not just in the US. And I looked at all of this, Michael, and there was a lot of anger and a lot of hate. And there are always exceptions. And what I see largely is there's a lot of fear in the world because the world has changed and people's lives are uncertain. We cannot plan with certainty. And that uncertainty translates to fear. And we often express fear as hate. So when you see hate in the streets, what you know is you're looking at people that are frightened. And when I look at it from that perspective, it helps me to have a little bit more empathy with my brothers and sisters. It doesn't mean that I condone the violence because I don't think the violence is the way to go. And the science shows us the violence isn't the way to go for this reason. And I'll invite our viewers to think about this. That field that we were talking about, it knows two states. It knows coherence or it knows chaos. And you can go out and angrily protest as much as you want for a good cause. You have to ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? And in the anger of that protest, are you feeding the field coherence or are you feeding the field chaos? And if it's chaos, then you're contributing to the very conditions you'd like to change. And this is an exercise that I do every day. What am I feeding the field today? What am I feeding the field in my response to my wife and the conversation that we're having, or to my producer? What am I feeding the field? And it helps to inform me. It's not about control or manipulation, but it informs me that I have a choice and where I might want to go with that choice.
You said it helps to inform me.
Yeah. So when I ask myself, what am I feeding the field? Again, it's not about control or manipulation for me. It informs me in terms of how I may respond in a certain circumstance or a certain situation. Because every day is a workshop. Every day is the workshop of life. And that's the opportunity. We get to live in our lives what we claim to be true in our hearts. It's very easy. And I have a lot of friends. I have to tell you, during the lockdowns, I had a lot of friends, fellow authors, speakers who I've known for years that claim to be one way in their lives and their hearts. And the moment that they were up against tough decisions and the moment that they were up against things they'd never seen before, they reverted. I was surprised to see how many reverted to a way of being that was so counter to what they had claimed and what they'd portrayed in their lives previously. And it told me that they were just literally scared shitless. And that's what was happening. They ran up against something, but this is important because they had a story, Michael, a story about themselves and their relationship to the world that they believed worked for them. And when they tried to apply that story to a condition in real world, that story failed them. And when that happened, it happens to all of us. Our stories will fail at some point. And then we have to choose, do we cling to a story that no longer serves us? Or do we bless that story and let it go because it worked well enough to get us to where we are? So we bless it and let it go, and then allow the new story in our lives. And this is where every one of us is in the world right now. There's a new human story emerging, a beautiful story of hope, possibility, of empowerment, personal empowerment, and the world out there that we know is possible in here. We know in our hearts what's possible. Now, because everything is up for grabs, this is the opportunity, the rare opportunity. When everything's buttoned up, it's tough to make a change. Everything's fallen apart at the seams because it's unsustainable. The unsustainable ways of thinking and living are falling apart. That's the doorway to the new human story. The thing is, you don't want to wait till it breaks to have the new story. You want to have a parallel way of living. You don't want to wait till the banks break to figure out a parallel financial system. And we have that with blockchain technology. You don't want to wait until the medical system collapses to find a way to take personal responsibility for your own health and healing. And we have those things. Michael Beckwith was on, he's a dear brother. It was on not long ago. And, Michael and I have had these conversations. He's got a powerful green drink that's right. He's formulated.
And he's rolling back the years as well.
He is. I've known Michael for many, many years. He always looks good and he's always vibrant. And I have to say he looks better and he's more vibrant now than I've seen him, probably 20, 25 years. And I'm really happy to see him living that in his life. He is he's a dear man and he's a good brother. So
a couple key points, and then we'll wind this down here. Do I go there? I go there. I can't believe I go there. I'm looking at a table before me. It's got flowers on it. It's got two stuffed animal chickens. I'm sure you're familiar with my best buddy, Roo. Roo the rooster, who is my wingman, my rooster in arms. He passed away less than 3 days ago. And he passed away suddenly. We're assuming it's a heart attack that he had. And while I'm challenged and I'm in the infancy of the grieving process, we can play with our energy. We can understand that, my whole paradigm and world get to be changed. As silly as it is just for a rooster, he was as much of a part of my life as anyone.
No, it's not silly at all. It's a living being that you have formed a deep emotional bond with. And I'm the same way with animals. There was a time in my life I was going to be a vet because I wanted to care for animals. And then I recognize there's a better way to do it. But it's not silly at all, Michael. And I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. And so when we get to our whole world crumbling and allowing for something greater, that's where I am today. Hannah, do you want to come back up here? That's exactly where I am. But that's where we all are. We all are having something crumbling in our lives right now. And we all are given, dear friend, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, he says that there is a bifurcation of humanity right now. We get to choose which direction we want to go. We can either bring it home on the inside, as you're saying, or we can let the whole thing blow up. And you said something so powerful before that I want to bring up here today, which has to do both with Rue and what's going on, with the authors falling apart and what's going on, with everyone. Consciousness informs itself through its creations.
Well, you just covered two very important things here. I'm going to go back to grief. I lost my mom during COVID unexpectedly, and because of the conditions in place, I was not allowed to be with her for a year before she passed, while she had COVID, or even after she died. Michael, they wouldn't let me be with her. It was, in my opinion, it was wrong. It was crazy. It made no sense. But I had to come to terms with it, and that's loss. And whether we have lost a loved one or a friend And hopefully some of our viewers have not, but we're all losing something because we've all lost a way of life. All of us have lost freedoms, and we've all lost a way of life. So we're all grieving something. We're all in mourning. This is where the science really kicks in for me. And I had to embrace this. When we experience our loss in our minds, the brain is a polarity organ, left and right brain, and you're always going to have right and wrong, good and bad, before and after, true and false, all of the success, failure, all of that stuff. And that serves us sometimes. When it comes to grieving, this is why the heart is so important. We can drop from our mind into our heart, and simply touching the heart center is one way to bring our attention into our hearts, as I talk about in a lot of our videos and books. The neural network in the heart is not a polarity network. Part of my blood heritage is Cherokee, Southeastern Cherokee. My father was Cherokee. My mother was a Jewish woman. So I'm this interesting combination of Jew and Hebrew blood and Cherokee blood.
And I grew up I grew up Jewish with Jewish blood, and then lived on and off the Navajo reservation for 6.5, 7 years.
Well, we have parallel experiences then. In Cherokee, there is a word for what I'm talking about, and it is called Shante Ishta. Shante Ishta means the single eye of the heart that sees what is, rather than the brain and the mind that will always see in polarity. So when I go to my heart to process my mom's passing, for example, or the loss of freedoms in our lives, it doesn't change what happens. It changes how I think about and how I feel about what happens. I have a book that was written that came out just before the pandemic called The Wisdom Codes. And it was a book where I pulled together the mantras and the prayers and the chants from many indigenous traditions and categorize them as they apply to life challenges. And one of those challenges was about loss. And I think one of the most powerful things for me, if you're with the Navajo, you know the Navajo have something called the beauty prayer. The Navajo call themselves Dine, so they don't call themselves Navajo.
Thank you. Because Navajo means thief in Spanish.
I know. Well, there's a whole story about where that comes from. So the Dine people, they have
people of the earth.
People of the earth have a prayer that is called the beauty prayer. That is actually a lengthy prayer in its entirety and ceremony. I had the opportunity a few years ago. There's a Navajo artist. His name is Shanto Bigay, who abbreviated the prayer in a way that can be applied every day in our lives. Maybe this is a good way to wrap our program today. It is 3 very simple phrases, and it simply says, the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. The beauty that I live with reminds us that beauty is already present in our lives everywhere. Our job is to find it. Our job is to seek out the beauty, even in the most horrible situations, because it has to be there. The beauty I live with, the beauty I live by, is an invitation for that beauty to become a guide stone in terms of how we see the world, how we get to choose how we see the world. If we interpret the world through the lens of hate and fear, then we will always see the world in hate and fear. So the beauty that I live by, the third phrase, the beauty upon which I base my life, is an invitation to allow for beauty to become a foundation, a cornerstone of every moment, every choice, everything we do in our lives, base that upon the principle of beauty. Now, you may have encountered this, I don't know. The Navajo are fascinating people, Dine people, because they view beauty as more than an emotional aesthetic. They literally say that beauty is a force of nature. It's the 5th force. Physicists acknowledge 4: the electromagnetism, the gravity field, and the strong and the weak nuclear force. The Navajo say that the 5th force is beauty. And I believe there's a lot of truth in that, Michael, because we are changed in the presence of beauty. When we are in the presence of beauty, the chemistry of our body shifts. And as we allow ourselves to interpret that beauty uniquely, we actually begin healing ourselves in the presence of what we perceive. So in the presence of loss, your loss and my loss. In my mind, it was horrible. I was angry because of the rules and the restrictions and because I missed my mom. Her birthday was just last week, so this is very present with me right now. And when I go into my heart, my mom's still gone. But the beauty I live with, the beauty I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life, there is a beauty and a symmetry to the life that she led in this world. Her passing is a part of that symmetry. When I was conceived, my father didn't want me. And he wanted my mom to get rid of me at a time when it was dangerous. She would have risked her life to end her pregnancy with me. That's where the world was in those days. And my mom fought for my life so that I could be here today. In my early life, she fought for me. And in her later life, I got to advocate and fight for her as she lost her health and as she lost her memory. She was in late stage dementia. So I got to fight for my mom as she fought for me. And there's a symmetry in that I could only grasp through my heart. My mind had a hard time seeing beyond the right and the wrong of what had happened. So what I'm saying, I'm giving some examples here, is that when we experience the good things as well as the tough things, if we can find a way to experience them from our heart, and it can simply be touching the heart center. So our awareness always goes to where we feel the physical touch, number one. Slowing the breathing, number two, so that we're exhaling for a period of time longer than we're inhaling. And what that does is it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, and it means that we're safe. And when we feel safe, the chemistry in our body changes, and we allow ourselves to be in our heart. And then when we consider the loss from the single eye of the heart rather than the polarity of the mind, that's where the explanation has to stop. It's something you simply have to experience. I can't explain it any more than the process of how to get there. And I'll just say for me, and the beauty prayer from my heart has really helped me to embrace. You use the term full circle a lot. I do as well. And it helps me to come full circle with my mom's passing. She's still gone, but I feel differently about it. And that's the power of beauty in our lives and the power of experiencing beauty from the heart.
Thank you. Do you think you'll see her again?
Maybe. I am on the at least the 200-year plan. So in this world, and I've said that since I was a kid. I always said I would live at least 200 years. I want to see the changes. I want to see the fruit of the labor that we have all gone through, and to know that our suffering wasn't in vain. There's something beautiful waiting for us. We are the generation that it takes a generation. There has to be a generation that lives the old and brings in the new. And I can't imagine a more exciting time to be here. If we're here now, it has to be for this reason. We wouldn't be here, because who would want to go through the pain and the suffering? But those of our brothers and sisters that are lost and forgotten, sometimes they need a little something. You never know what it's going to be. A little something that lights that spark of memory and says, I'm more than I've been led to believe, and I'm more than my pain and my suffering. And now let me see what I can do with the life I've been given to find out what that more really is. And I think we do that for you. Inspire me, Michael. You inspire me with your guests, your podcasts. Many of them are dear friends and colleagues, but you draw from them things that I would never hear from them in a typical conversation. So you inspire me in that way. And I know you do the same for many of your viewers and listeners. So thank you for dedicating, and your wife. I don't know if it's a wife or it's a partner, but I know that she brought.
It's wife. She's standing behind. She has Hannah Bear has put in 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 bows in her hair right now, as she was decorating mommy with beauty.
Well, I want to thank you to Michael's wife. I've never met you, but you brought a beautiful child into the world, and I know that you all work together to make these podcasts possible. It takes a team. So thank you, brother, for the time we've had together and for trusting me with your audience, because the truth is you didn't know what I was going to say, and you didn't know what we were going to do today. So thank you for that trust. It means a lot.
Most welcome. And I am beyond filled with gratitude and love for you, Gregg. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I've got to ask, where can people go, Gregg, to find out more, to find your books, to find all your beautiful work?
They can't go. It doesn't exist nowhere.
No, vacuum.
Come to the mothership where I am right now. No, if they just go simply to the website, Gregg Braden, Gregg, 2 G's. 1 G is short for Gregory, and my mother gave me 2 G's, so I would never be a Gregory. So it's Gregg Braden, BRADEN.com. My tours to the Holy Land, to Peru are listed there. Through the desert Southwest, books, the books are all available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you find books, and the live events. Now that we're able to do those again, those live events are listed there as well. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. Oh,
it's so important, and I want everybody to check out your work, because we can label it whatever we want right now, but it is such an important time to be informed, to think different ways, and to reinform. She cannot get enough of you, to reinform the field anew.
Michael, a lot of the really current material that we're talking about now is on our YouTube channel, and I want to say that so much of this work was being bootlegged, and I had no control over the way it was being used or the quality. So it was all taken down except for the official, it's Gregg Braden official YouTube channel, where we get to talk about things like disclosure and climate change and all those things, based on the best science of the modern world. So,
well, thank you. And thank you for all that you do. And I'm sure Hannah Bear is going to want to check it out as well.
Bye, Hannah Bear. Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
You want to go, yay. We just had the most amazing, yay, interview with Gregg Braden. Yay. I hope you enjoyed it, yay, as much as I did. To find out, yay, she just wants to keep clapping and celebrating. She had so much fun with Gregg, didn't you? Yay! We've got our School of Mystics down below. You've got other videos over here. Love you guys so much. There's attunements as well. You can find that down below with our daily woohoo. And how does it get any better than this? Right, Hannah Bear? Hey! Love you guys. Here's that next video. Good job, Hannah Bear. Oh my God, you just waved. You just waved. I've never seen you wave like that before. You just totally waved on camera. You totally waved on camera again. You totally waved on camera. Yay. Yay. Yay.